And so we should be live now.
Well, 47.2 seconds. No.
Is that like a smoke machine in front of you of some sort?
Oh, no, I have my computer screen here.
Oh, okay.
Or are you talking about this?
Yeah, it just seems like there's some steam coming up from there.
Oh, I'm just...
It's an air conditioner?
I don't think so, no.
Oh.
Do I look smoky?
Okay, I don't hear anything, but I can hear the class cat.
You can't hear anything? How
No.
about now?
Oh, his volume's
Okay.
Can you see me, Gareth?
I can see you, yeah. You're gone.
Yeah. My screen. Okay, so if I can go here. Can you see this?
I can see you, I can hear you.
Can you see my screen?
No. I
Okay.
can just see you.
Oh, I have to hit share. Chrome tab. Okay, if I go here, share.
Oh, yeah.
And you can see, there we go. Good. Okay. Awesome. So I might do that during the meeting.
Sure.
Yeah.
No problem.
This is actually a pretty good app, the video this program you use.
Yeah, it's called Switcher Studio.
Yeah.
The only downfall is it only, like in studio, for when I film stuff, you can only use Apple products.
Oh, okay.
And then
I'm on a Microsoft tablet right now.
When we do video chat like this, anybody can use whatever they want. But in studio, I can only use Apple stuff. So we have a bunch of iPhones and iPads and stuff to film in studio.
Mm-hmm.
But that's really the only drawback that I've seen of it so far.
Did people find our last meeting helpful?
I didn't actually hear too much feedback other than two or three people said.
Okay, well, that's good.
We had, what did we have last time? That's good. We had 50 views on our last video. So
okay.
Hopefully we'll pump those numbers up on this one. We've had a lot of good response with live streams. So
good. Well, I really appreciate you letting me come on and do this with you. It means a lot.
Oh, you're telling me. I am happy that you keep saying yes. So.
Oh no, I can't be present right now because I need to follow the labor codes and uphold the social distancing requirements. So I know a lot of people would be fine with it, but there's many seniors who are more susceptible to COVID-19.
Yeah.
And what I've heard online from my constituents is that the last thing they want is someone coming from the lower mainland into the rural communities where there's less COVID-19. So I've taken that to heart. It's been hard, but it's something I'd break. I don't want to break. But now that we're in phase 2, I believe it's more appropriate because they've listed some of the social distancing requirements. So I'm actually going to try and make it up to the canyon next week for some infrastructure stuff.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Right on. So,
And hopefully phase 3 is starting in the near future as well.
um, we are at just shy of 7 o'clock, so I'm going to hit the part where people can actually see us because they have listened to our banter for the last few minutes.
Oh, okay.
So I'm going to do that, and we're going to go. So we are live. So for those of you joining us, my name is Gareth. You're watching the Hub Online Network, and I am joined by our local member of Parliament for Mission Matsqui Fraser Canyon, Brad Vis. How are you doing tonight?
I'm excellent, sir. Thank you so much for having me back on the show.
Well, again, thank you so much for again saying yes. I'm sure that you're a busy guy, and we're a fairly small news organization up here. So thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to come say hi to us.
Yes. Well, as I was just mentioning to you before we started, I made a commitment during the election that I was going to be present in every community, and this is the best way for me to connect with constituents in Ashcroft and Cache Creek while respecting the provincial guidelines. So it means a lot for me that you give me the opportunity to be on your show.
So we have you until what, 8:15, I believe, is what your assistant was saying. So
8:15, let's do it.
We should get to it now. So we're going to do just for the people at home, how we're going to run this is for the first little while, we're going to do a little bit of an interview. And then we have a bunch of questions from your writing. And so we'll get to that. We'll make sure that we have enough time to get to all of the questions.
Yeah.
We're not going to be taking follow-up questions in the comments. So whatever questions we have are the questions we're going to stick with. But what I would like to be able to do is, if we do get any follow-up questions, I would like to send them to you so you can answer them. And then on my twice weekly news show, I'll say your answers.
Yeah, that would be great. I'd be pleased to do that.
Okay. So that being said, my first topic I'd like to talk to you about is I'd like to touch upon how you view the Liberals' response to COVID-19 thus far. What would the Conservatives or you in the Conservative Party have done differently or the same?
Right. Well, like as I mentioned to you last time, since the very beginning, all the parties took a Team Canada approach. All of the major programs were originally agreed upon by Parliament. That includes the CERB and the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy. I wrote a letter to the minister specifically for supports for students and supports for seniors as well. Some of the things that we would have done differently, well, some of them were responded to, actually. We said the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy was not sufficient enough for people to return to work. They'll increase the rate from 10% to 75% of an average salary in Canada. So we were pleased with that, and we were pleased that there was finally some support for seniors. What we would have done differently, I believe, is in Canada we have the we have a program and legislation for emergencies, and that involves all of the political parties. What took place this week is basically the shutting down of Parliament. So as a legislator in the legislature, my normal powers to seek information from the government, to have a say, to submit amendments on how money is spent in parliamentary committees, to compel witnesses to appear before Parliament. Some of those powers that Parliament normally has been suspended. And we believe in a time of crisis that the opposition, and not just the Conservatives, but the NDP and the Bloc Québécois too, and the Green Party, all play a vital role in holding the government to account. And we believe that our rights as parliamentarians have been infringed upon in that respect. That's one area where, if I were at the helm, I think things would have been done a little bit differently. But one rule of thumb during a crisis, you never want to criticize people making some of the big decisions in a crisis. That said, there's still some other questions too. I think the government could have moved faster on personal protective equipment, and there's still lots of questions about why the government donated equipment to China when our health officials were stating in Canada that we might face a crisis here and that equipment might be used for Canada's well-being. So that's one other area of criticism.
One quick follow-up to that, talking about not being in the legislature. Is
Yeah.
there a time frame as to when it's looking like you might be able to go back?
Right. So Parliament was suspended. We still have virtual committees.
Okay.
And we have what's called committee of the whole. So people actually go to Parliament, but it's a fake Parliament because we can ask questions and we can debate, but the powers of the opposition parties, the powers that all members of Parliament hold, are not in force. So we won't see a return to regular Parliament until the fall, and that's very problematic because we haven't had a budget yet from this government, and this government's been around for almost 7 months now, if I get the dates correct. So we need to make sure that we have an economic plan to help Canada not just deal with the immediate issues through these massive cash injections, but how are we going to get out of the COVID-19 situations? How are we going to get people back to work? So some of those things aren't being addressed in the way that we, the Conservatives especially, would like to be seen addressed and planned out.
Okay, yep, fair enough. So the next thing is, I see you using Twitter quite a bit.
Okay.
In my twice weekly news show, I actually take the last tweet that you specifically make and I share that tweet in my show. But one thing that you've been sort of talking about a lot and been vocal about is about seniors and the $300 benefit that has been given to sort of the blanket seniors in general.
Right.
So I'm wondering if you can explain what I'm talking about to the people that might not know, and have been any new sort of leaps forward in that regard.
Yeah. Well, first off, there hasn't been any changes to the program, but if you go to my Facebook page, Brad Vis for Mission Matsqui Fraser Canyon, there's a couple of lines of questions on the Human Resources Committee covering this very point. So my contention with what the government did is that they gave a blanket $500 check to many Canadians without it being income tested. So as it was reported in the Globe and Mail, a senior who is making up to $128,000 a year is still going to be getting a form of payment from the government right now. And my position is that all of the payments that the government should have been giving to seniors should have been only to those on the guaranteed income supplement. There are a lot of seniors in Mission Matsqui Fraser Canyon, and I think the money would have been better used if all of the recipients on guaranteed income supplement receive more, and then maybe in addition, I should say, those on the lower income threshold who also receive the old age security. So basically, my contention is this money could have been better distributed to the seniors who need it the most. That was my major beef with the government program. I did support supports for seniors, just wanted more to the low income seniors.
Just as a not off topic, but similar to that, has there been any other things that we might not have seen along the same line? Groups of people getting chunks of money that could have been spent better?
You know what? In some cases, I think the additional payment for parents under the Canada Child Benefit, again, they could have applied a more stricter income testing threshold for that. And because I know there was a lot of families do have extra costs right now, but I do believe that those extra costs are even more inflated for low-income Canadians. And if the government is going to be distributing funds in the way they are, I believe that those should be targeted to those Canadians who need it the most. So I would say the same applies there. Yeah. And thirdly, I don't believe that foreign students should be receiving the Canada Emergency Response Benefit. That should be reserved for Canadians in permanent residence.
And lastly, before we get into the main part of this show, which is the questions, one of the other big things that you've been talking about and has happened since you and I last spoke has been the Nova Scotia shooting and the gun ban by the Liberal government. So what your thoughts are about that?
Yeah. Well, thanks for that. I wrote an editorial in the Ashcroft Cache Creek Journal But basically, what happened? Well, first off, what happened in Nova Scotia is an absolute tragedy, and my political party is committed to meaningful policy changes that are going to address some of the root causes of crimes and some of the mental health issues that we're dealing with. In the last election, I campaigned on support for anti-gang initiatives, youth prevention programs, tougher sentences for violent offenders, and increased powers for the Canada Border Services agencies, to name a few. What's going on right now with the Order in Council is the Liberal government is targeting Canadians who have gone through multiple steps to acquire a firearm. They are legally vetted by the RCMP, and if you're involved in any of the numerous gun clubs in Mission, Matsqui, Fraser Canyon, the people who participate at these clubs take their right to use a firearm very seriously and uphold some of the strictest laws that you could imagine. So I think the Liberals are playing a bit of politics with this issue right now. And frankly, I asked the question, would this Order in Council address the fact that this man had a mental health issue, that there's serious questions about how the RCMP responded to him, that he impersonated a peace officer and broke that sacred trust that our citizens have with the RCMP, and that he impersonated an RCMP officer to the point of dressing up a car that he bought to make it look like a police car. So that's a very serious crime. That's an indictable offense. And I think, to my earlier point, the government should focus on giving the CBSA the powers they need to stop gun smuggling, and give our police officers the tools they need to actually address gun violence in Canada, which they do not have right now. So one of my first acts as a parliamentarian actually was to sponsor a bill to increase the sentencing that we have for people in possession of an illegal firearm.
Once Parliament gets back, or the legislature gets back going in the fall, is there a recourse on the Conservative side to change this, or?
Well, the Order in Council is the right of any government to use an Order in Council. I think it's opportunistic for the government to use it during a pandemic, when they said to Canadians that they weren't going to address any other policy matters, for them to do this. I think that's undemocratic, and makes it so that they're not facing any scrutiny from other parliamentarians. I don't think that's the way we should do things. But the other aspect of the Order in Council is that it does require legislation that needs to go before Parliament on the acquisition of firearms legally owned by Canadians and the subsequent purchasing of those firearms. This will be a major cost to the federal government, likely into the hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, and they don't have an effective plan to do this or enforce the Order in Council right now, which just came to people so unexpectedly. So when Parliament does return, there will be a vigorous and healthy debate on this subject, and the Canadians will be able to make up their mind where they stand on the issue.
And you do a lot of these types of videos with a lot of different people. I catch clips of these on your Twitter page.
Yeah.
Where can people follow you?
The best place to follow me is on Facebook or my website, bradvis.ca. I try to post a lot of information and things that I'm doing on my website. And secondly, Brad Vis for Mission, Matsqui, Fraser Canyon. I will update that handle in the very near future just to be Brad Vis MP. And I use that to where I have the largest audience to post a lot of my interventions in virtual committee, some live videos and different things I'm thinking. And then Twitter is second. I also have an Instagram account that my staff manage, and they post things from time to time on there as well.
Awesome. All right. So now we're going to move into questions from the public that you and I have been gathering up for the last week or so. So
Great.
Starting at the top, what is your opinion of the liberal government's approach to COVID-19? Is it sufficient, and does it meet the needs you're hearing from your constituents?
Yeah. Okay. So we kind of covered that in your introductory remarks. So I'll just add that I think it's in the best interest of Canadians not to hear from the Prime Minister every day standing in front of his cottage, but to hear from the Prime Minister taking questions and vigorously debating with other parliamentarians in the House of Commons for the best outcomes. And that's one of the major drawbacks of what's taking place right now, is that there's not enough accountability. The parliamentary budget officer has said that the government doesn't have an overall economic plan. We're spending more money right now than we've ever spent basically in the history of Canada. We're hitting record deficits. We've spent more than we did during World War II, and the accountability is not there. And it's not just me stating it, it's the independent parliamentary budget officer. In addition to that, because Parliament isn't functioning properly right now, our independent auditor general, they've had their budget cut. They can't do the independent assessments that Canadians expect to ensure that things are being done effectively on their behalf. So we need accountability, and we need a functioning Parliament to address this crisis and to make sure that we have the best outcomes possible once people begin to return to work, as they already have over the last 2 weeks.
What supports are available for seniors impacted by COVID-19? Can you speak to the troubling Canadian military reports on long-term care homes?
Yeah. So first on seniors, we did already discuss my contention with the old age security and GIS payments. Again, I think the payment should have been more targeted to low-income seniors through an income threshold, but that I've lost that argument, and the payment should be going out in the near future. All parties did agree to expanding some funds for the New Horizons for Seniors program, and seniors. But I haven't seen, and I've asked where that money has been going during committee, but I haven't received a response yet. Many seniors also qualified for an additional GST credit about in April, I believe, which helped out a lot of people in the riding who contacted me about that. Regarding the tragic situation in Quebec, especially, and the role of the armed forces. In Canada, we're a very wealthy nation, and when any citizen is not receiving effective care, it cuts to your heart. This is just tragic, and I believe that all parliamentarians are realizing the need for some better standards at the provincial level to address seniors' care and to make sure that our seniors are treated with dignity. So that's the big thing, and it's unfortunate that it's our military that's having to tell us that right now. And so I believe that we need to really encourage our provincial governments, especially to target more funds to long-term care of seniors, and also to address, which is often a better model, more incentives to help people stay in their homes and develop home care strategies, which many experts say experts say sorry, I'm losing my words here. Experts say when home care takes place, the medical outcomes are better for our elderly in our communities. So I'd like to see some of that moving forward.
One of the things that I was listening to a CBC story the other day, or was it this? It might have been this morning. Anyway, it doesn't matter. They were talking about how, in this particular situation, about the military saying what what it looks like in these long-term care homes. They're saying that they were brought in halfway through the pandemic, and so half of the staff is out sick, and things might not have been looked after for the last month and a half. Do you think there's any possible truth to that? Like maybe it was better before COVID-19, or do you think it's an ongoing problem?
I think that from my own personal experience with my grandparents, that there are a lot of discrepancies in the quality of care for seniors in Canada right now. I have one Oma, she's 93, she still lives in her home, and she gets regular visits from Fraser Health, and generally receives good care because she has a support network around her. I had another grandmother in Ontario, actually, who was in a long-term care facility, and it was very good. But then I have other friends who, similar experiences, who've had similar experiences, and other ones who've said that some of the long-term care homes, the standards weren't met. And we saw that actually happen in our province when we let the Liberal government allow the Chinese company owned by the Communist Party to purchase long-term care homes, only to have their licenses revoked because they weren't upholding a standard of care Canadians feel is acceptable.
So next question is, Canadians were rightfully horrified at the Nova Scotia shooting. Can you provide your thoughts on this tragedy?
I think we actually kind of covered that already in our introductory remarks, so I just refer people to that discussion.
And to people at home, I did not read these questions before I had sent talking points. When I came up with those, I didn't read these questions, so I'm sorry that I've sort of monopolized on other people's questions.
Yeah, and full disclosure, I received these questions at about 5:30 this afternoon, right when I was having dinner. So this is not pre-scripted.
Awesome. Okay, so the federal government has enacted a firearm ban through what some would call controversial means.
Yeah.
Pandemic. What are your thoughts on the ban and how it would be enacted? What can be done for the rights of law-abiding firearm owners?
Again, I think we've covered this pretty well. I'll just add that there are 2 petitions circulating right now, E2576 and E2574. I also would note that some of the Canadian Sports Shooters Association or maybe some of the other national organizations have launched court challenges. So get involved with a non-for-profit, one of the lobby organizations, and if you're interested in this, have your voice be heard in through those means. I've also received a ton of comments from constituents on this matter and have raised it through the petition process in virtual committee on 2 occasions already.
So just to go a little bit further on this one.
Yeah.
The term "you don't need an assault rifle," and then that's when people say, "Well, you should be allowed to have guns," people retort, "You don't need to have an assault rifle."
Yeah.
If someone says that to you, what is your sort of?
Well, there are many gun experts in the Parliament of Canada, and one of them happens to be Aaron O'Toole, who is running for the leadership of the Conservative Party. And a few weeks ago, he wrote an editorial on the issue, or appeared on CKNW in Vancouver. And he said that, and I believe I mentioned it in some of my writings as well, that assault rifles have already been banned in Canada since 1979. Many of the firearms in question now are under such strict guidelines that you're not allowed to have the gun open at your home. The only place you're allowed to use it is in the range. And we have already so many strict regulations. And I think once Canadians learn the processes that Canadians go through to receive their firearms license and then additional licenses to operate certain firearms, they feel much more assured about our firearms policies in Canada. And I will note that Mr. Palmer, who's chief of the police of Vancouver, and I believe he still might be head of the Canadian Chiefs of Police, said on the record in August of 2019 that we already have very good firearms laws in Canada and that no new laws are required. What's required is some of those points I mentioned before, enhancing the powers of CBSA, giving our police officers the tools they need to do their jobs, and investing in our youth through anti-gang programming. In Abbotsford, part of the riding, there was a program run through Archway Community Services that targeted youth who had issues with gun violence and who were involved in gangs, and they directed resources to solely work with those people who were known by our police officers to be causing trouble, and they had a lot of success turning people around. And I really do believe that we can spend more on our youth to prevent them from entering a life of crime, and same for people that suffer from mental health issues. But let me be clear, we need very strong gun laws in Canada. We need extremely strong mental health regulations, and I believe we have some of those things already. But I do not believe a blanket ban that doesn't address the illegal inflow of guns from the United States is going to do anything to improve public safety based on all of the available evidence to me and other parliamentarians.
Do you have your gun license?
No, I do not. I grew up doing sports shooting with my father, and I grew up in a rural part of my community and used a shotgun on a number of occasions on the farm, and so participated in recreational sports shooting, but I have never been a legal gun owner. What this really comes down to is um, a question of freedom and evidence-based policy, and doing what I believe will actually improve some of the public safety issues that are probably a little more prevalent where I live in the riding versus Ashcroft.
Awesome. So residents in the Fraser Canyon have heard rural broadband promises since 2015. What can be done to bring high-speed internet to the canyon and beyond?
Yeah, hey, I should probably connect my page here, like I was just about to do before, because I put up a couple of recommendations earlier, and I think those are just good to take a look at right now. Let's see if I can, if you can see those on my screen. Yeah, you can see those right now. So I put out a call for anyone on this call who has specific comments about rural broadband internet. Working with my colleague Michelle Rempel Garner from Calgary, our party developed 14 recommendations. And you can get these on Michelle Rempel's website. I believe I have a link on my website as well. But we need a Canadian broadband strategy. We need to look very closely at our local connectivity infrastructure fund. We need to look at the role that our big telecommunications companies play and the lack of access that Canadians in rural Canada have to reliable internet service. We need to be more transparency about the current approach that we have and the challenges that people have in rural Canada. And we need simple contracts. And I believe that municipalities have a bigger role. Those are just some of the recommendations when I saw this that I pulled up really quickly. This is an issue that was raised with me during the election on a number of occasions, and I feel quite strongly about it because to have a vibrant community in rural Canada, you need a connected community. And I really do believe that internet is a public service and it's a public right for people to operate businesses and to thrive, need access to the internet. And I will also say that in the Fraser Canyon, there's a large Indigenous population, and Indigenous Canadians have even less access to reliable internet. And to me, that's not acceptable. It's holding people back from being their best selves.
Well, just having the example of, so now all the kids are out of school and at home, people at home have internet. It's just, if they're being asked to be doing their schooling from home, it just makes it that much harder. So.
Yeah, and I've heard from a number of families and friends who have absolutely faced that issue. It is a very prevalent problem across the riding, and that's why I reached out to the newspaper and was asking for people to give me their feedback so I can bring that forward in my party and develop policies that are going to help connect rural Canada, because what we're seeing now is that a lot of Canadians want to live in rural Canada because they appreciate the pace of life. But if there is not a hospital, and if access to healthcare, and if there's not internet, those are two of the major drawbacks stopping people from moving to communities like Ashcroft. So as the representative, I have a responsibility to bring those things forward and to make sure that Ashcroft, Cache Creek, Lillooet especially can thrive in the 21st century. And people feel like so many people are doing remote work, not just remote education. A lot of people feel, hey, why did I have to go into the office all the time? I can do this from home and I can be just or more productive than I was in my office environment. And so what's to stop someone who maybe only has to go into Vancouver 2 or 3 days a month from living in a community like Ashcroft and having a reliable internet service that would allow them to have the bandwidth to run their business out there? So that's kind of my vision for the Fraser Canyon. We've seen some good examples of that in Lytton, actually, where they've taken initiatives to develop a local non-for-profit society to expand access to high-speed internet, and it's definitely an area I want to spend more time focusing on moving forward.
Awesome. So what is being done to help the steelhead return to the Thompson?
Yeah, this was an issue that I raised right away. I think the MLA, Jackie Taggart, has done some really good work on this, and Stephen Rice out in Spence's Bridge is pretty passionate about this, and they've asked me to raise some concerns about species at risk and why the Species at Risk Act wasn't used for the Thompson River steelhead earlier this year. So I didn't get the response back I wanted from the provincial or federal government, who believe that other measures can be taken, conservation measures can be taken. I can't pretend to have all of the answers on steelhead trout, but I know I need to keep raising it and listening to other officials like Mr. Rice, especially, who've devoted much of their life to addressing this issue. And it's something I'm passionate about and look forward to taking direction from some of my colleagues moving forward. But I don't believe the status quo is good enough.
What are some of the things stopping steelhead from coming up here?
Well, a lot of it has to do with gillnet fishing. We don't, there is, in the commercial fishery out in the lower Fraser, some of these migrating fish might be caught up. So that's a big issue. And that's so we need to have more of a selective fishery, and we need to make sure that conservation is a priority as well. But I hear a lot about the gillnets and some of the steelhead being caught with salmon species in the commercial fishery and other indigenous fisheries too.
All right, so now we're into a segment called Individual Questions. Support amendments to strengthen our Canadian Environment Protection Act, including our environmental rights. Bill C-438.
Okay, so the Environmental Protection Act was from the last Parliament. I'm not sure if a new version has been tabled in 2020. I don't believe it has. But in 2017, when I was working as a senior staffer for MP EdFast, I was part of a review of the Canada Environmental Protection Act, and a statutory review that took place at that time. It was a bit overdue. And I believe that there are a lot of ways that we can use our current Environmental Protection Act to improve environmental rights. For one thing, we need to make it easier for Canadians to challenge government officials and companies on pollution, and to have those matters brought before the courts in a timely way. Some of those provisions in our current act have rarely, I don't believe, if ever, have been used, even though it's been around since the 1980s. So I think that's problematic, and there's lots of cases where people would like to see more justice for our environment, myself included, and we're not seeing that now. I really do believe that our environmental laws in Canada don't address the realities of vulnerable populations. So in some cases, that would include pregnant mothers or Canadians living in poverty, and the additional stressors that when you're living in poverty, that negative environmental impacts will have on your health. I think our law can address that, especially for newborns as well. We don't have we need more protections for newborn Canadians, and to ensure that their health isn't impacted by different products that we're importing, or different toxic substances in the products we use on a day-to-day basis. I also believe on the environment that we can do a much better job of coordinating various provincial and federal environmental rules and regulations and harmonizing those in many cases. There's a lot to be done as it relates to the protection of, sorry, I lost track of my train of thought. My son was in the background. How the Environmental Protection Act relates to the Minister of Health, and what role the Minister of Environment versus the Minister of Health have in administering the Act as it relates to toxic substances. I would say that more can be done on the Environmental Protection Act and how it applies to the Motor Vehicle Act on transportation pollution. And I could probably ramble off a couple of more there, but I would encourage committee, I would encourage the listeners today to look back on the previous Parliament and the Standing Committee for Environment and the report on the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. I was one of the staffers really involved in that, and I think that's a good place to start. And where we can see some big improvements on environmental justice in Canada, especially. Sorry for the long-winded answer. It's something I spent a lot of time working on in the past.
Oh, for sure. So talking about toxic materials and stuff, do you feel that if we had more industry in Canada, that we might be able to mitigate some of that?
Well, the risk assessment for toxicology is a very evolving science, and they're making a lot, like with data, data management practices as it relates to toxicology are making major strides in Canada right now, and the technology is changing so quickly. I think our laws need to be updated to account for those new sciences. A lot's changed since the 1980s, and we need to make sure that our laws are applicable for the 21st century. For industry, there is a role for, I believe, industry to play if we have independently regulated scientists to ensure that they're providing data as well that's independently verified to ensure the safety and well-being of Canadians. We could also do a lot more on our ambient air quality standards and national pollution regulation, how pollution travels between one jurisdiction and another, and improve reporting on our airflow and air quality management practices. That has a lot to do with industrial development. So,
so that's 2 or 3 questions are all, I believe, from one person, but. All Canadians deserve to breathe clean air, drink clean water, and eat safe food. These areas of need can only be guaranteed for all Canadians when it is nationally recognized and strengthened into a federal environmental bill of rights or a constitutional amendment. This being said, do we have your commitment to support amendments to strengthen our Canadian Environment Protection Act, including our Environmental Rights Bill C-438?
Well, I think I already answered that already. I do believe that our Canada Environmental Protection Act absolutely needs to be amended sooner rather than later. I believe that many of the rights in previous versions of the Environmental Bill of Rights that I have read are incorporated into that act and can be and we can use that act to uphold those rights Canadians want to have. But this brings me to another topic, though, on right to clean air and clean water. During the election, we talked a lot about access to clean water in Canada, and it's one of the reasons why we need Parliament to be functioning again is because we haven't received an update from the Minister of Indigenous Affairs on what the government's done to ensure that there's no more water advisories on First Nations reserves across Canada. This is why we need to be functioning as a society, because it is not right under any circumstance that all Canadians don't have access to potable water in their homes, and that's why we need to see some of these laws changed as well. But I believe also we can accomplish many of the things encompassed in previous versions of the Environmental Protection Act, in the Environmental Bill of Rights that I've read through an amended and updated CEPA for the 21st century.
What was your experience in Ottawa pre-COVID?
Well, I thought I was, if you go to my work page on Parliment Canada, every MP, it's public record. Everything I've done or what I'm saying publicly is right on there. And I think as a new MP, I was really doing my best to uphold the issues that were brought forward to me during the election. I was able to speak on a number of key pieces of legislation, including international trade, medically assisted in death. I was the first parliamentarian to talk about the Big Bar landslide, which has a major impact on all the tributaries of the Fraser River. I thought I hit the ground running and was doing my job effectively. So I thought I was just looking forward to to do more work on, say, rural broadband internet in the spring that obviously have been curtailed a bit.
We see such bad adversarial behavior in the House. What is it like for a newbie?
I would tend to disagree that there is bad adversarial behavior. Most Canadians only tune into Parliament during the 45 minutes of question period, and yeah, question period it's political theater. It's not actually a question and answer period. It's for people to make a point. I would encourage community members to tune in more during the debates on legislation to see how parliamentarians are working together, and even during our virtual parliament, or sorry, virtual committee, it's not parliament, to see some of the collaboration that's going on. So our system is not perfect, and yes, voices are raised very, very loudly, and sometimes that's appropriate. But my experience so far has not been very adversarial. There has been robust and challenging debates. But I generally get along very well with my opposition colleagues. We are all elected to do a job for Canadians, and we're all there to put Canadians first. At least I hope.
I know that you've taken up the cause of the Fraser. What needs to happen to protect the salmon?
Yeah, constant question. Again, there's lots of discussion about gill nets, but generally speaking, I think we need to work with First Nations more. There is a large natural infrastructure component that needs to be addressed on the Fraser River. We have in the southern part of the Fraser, we have a very extensive diking system that needs to be updated and made fish friendly. Right now, it's more like a sushi mill, and that's not acceptable in the 21st century. So we need to update our flood management protocol to account for salmon-friendly infrastructure. We need to conserve the areas that still exist and are still good for spawning, and those need to be. We need stronger park protections, and we need to work with our local Indigenous partners who have a much better understanding of the land and the salmon migrations in those areas than a DFO official that comes by once a year. Thirdly, we need better enforcement mechanisms to uphold our rules already and to make sure that people aren't overfishing. Fourth, we need to look very closely at the commercial fishery and the role of farm salmon on the Pacific coast.
And this is from the asker's perspective. I keep hearing about a green recovery, a recovery that responds to the climate crisis as well as restarting the economy. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, generally on a recovery, we won't have any type of recovery until we see a budget and an economic plan from the government. Right now, we have neither, and nothing is possible until we receive the appropriate plans and fiscal projections from our federal Minister of Finance and the Prime Minister to plan ahead. I believe, like all Canadians, that we want to see greener products. We want to see more electrical cars on the road, but civil society has a big role in playing in that too. We look at how our lives have changed over the last. I'm 36 in July next month. Since I graduated from high school, how much life has changed since in the last 18 years as it relates to smartphones and our use of technology. And I think we're going to see more of that in the next 20 years, and it will be in ways that improves our environment, especially as it relates to electrical transportation and hopefully more investments in rail transportation across Canada as well. But I don't believe, like some have called for the end of natural resource extraction in Canada. I don't believe that's oil is still going to be around, but we need to encourage all forms of business, especially those in the green economy, to thrive, and we need to give them the tools they need to operate in Canada and succeed in the 21st century. And we need to encourage Canadians and create the standards by which Canadians are going to adopt those lifestyle changes and product changes that are going to make those environmental improvements.
So what are your thoughts on rural economic development as it pertains to our riding?
Yeah, well, I think one of the I was on a call recently with the owners of the Ashcroft terminal, And I think this is, I know some people, there's some issues right now with access to the river and stuff and crossing over into the property. But generally, I think in Ashcroft and Cache Creek specifically, having a major company move into the community like that is going to bring so many wonderful economic benefits as an anchor employer and an industry leader. And so I'm very, very optimistic about what I'm seeing there. Some of the other things I'd like to add is that I've been having I was talking to the Community Futures office, I believe it's Barb in Community Futures in town, or Donna
Her
at
name's
Community
Deb.
Future.
You're
Deb,
so
sorry.
close.
Deb, yes, Donna, yeah, sorry. I had a great conversation with, I've had a number of great conversations with Deb. And about rural economic development. First of all, like where we're at right now, we need to have some more certainty. I know some businesses are shutting, and that's really problematic. But there's just and we both agree that there's just so much potential in the region for people to thrive. And I think if we address some of the rural internet issues we talked about earlier, and we maintain that critical infrastructure, and we maintain the hospital, that there is a bright future in this community, because young people want to live in communities like Ashcroft and Cache Creek and Lillooet. They like the freedom of rural Canada. They like the nature, and they like the pace of life. And so I think we're going to see a bright future, but it's gonna have to start with some major investments in key infrastructure.
What can you/we do to bring high-speed internet to the canyon and beyond?
Okay, I think we covered that pretty good already. I would encourage people to check out Michelle Rempel's website and her 14 recommendations on Connect Canada that I've been recently pushing as well. And if anyone has any comments on this that they'd like to share directly with me, please do so. Your feedback's really, really important.
And the best place to do that is to message you via Facebook?
Well, the best way to do that is to email me at brad.vis@parl.gc.ca.
We'll put that into our comments to make sure people can contact and get that easily.
Yeah.
And just for people at home, we do have Jessica in the studio managing our chats right now. So thank you to Jessica that is doing that this evening. With all the federal CERB programs, what are your thoughts on a universal basic income?
This is a big debate right now, and I haven't decided one way or the other how I feel on the issue. I will say that agricultural producers in the riding have almost unanimously stated that they're facing labor shortages right now because people are using the CERB benefit and not returning to work. Our Prime Minister came out today and was encouraging people to go back to work, but they are still receiving some of those benefits. And in some, especially for seasonal work, there's not the incentive to return to work. I think without taking a direct position on it right now, for a universal basic income to work in Canada, we'd basically have to cancel or put together all of the social programs at the provincial and federal level, and stop all of them and put it into a universal basic income. There's also other questions that we can discuss about changing the taxable income thresholds that might make it easier for Canadians. But generally speaking, what I'm hearing from business owners is that even with these generous programs right now, it's been very, very challenging to get the seasonal labor they require to maintain our food security.
Okay, so now this section is titled Liberal Bills, Canadian Democracy. So is it true that any bills that the Liberals have passed in the last 5 years cannot be repealed by a new government?
No, that is not true.
2, as Canadian citizens, we are looking forward to having democracy back. So A, freedom of speech, B, freedom of press, C, ownership of private property enshrined in the Canadian Constitution. That sounds more like a statement than a question.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll just maybe comment on the second point about freedom of the press. One thing the Conservative Party has been very clear that we do not believe that the additional grants that the Liberal government has given to certain news organizations are in the best interest of maintaining freedom of the press. I don't believe it's in the interest to have major government grants going directly to news agencies to maintain objectivity in our national reporting. On enshrining private property rights into the Constitution, I would have to look into that a little more closely before giving a fulsome response. But one issue that we have faced on rural agricultural properties is that some of our trespassing laws at the provincial level are very, very hard to enforce. And the Abbotsford Police have actually called for better rules to ensure that producers are not negatively impacted, and that people actually do uphold the trespassing laws that we do have in Canada already, which hasn't been the case in Abbotsford and Mission especially. I don't know if you guys have had issues like that in Ashcroft, where protesters are going onto people's farms and stopping them from doing their jobs.
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, it was on the front page of the newspaper last year a few times. And freedom of speech, we all want freedom of speech, and I believe all Canadians stand up for that, and we need to uphold that at all times. Yeah.
For full disclosure for our people at home watching, my particular contract and this show is produced by the Canadian government.
Okay.
We take advantage of that particular grant. I work for a thing called Cactus Media, which grant to do an LJI, or Local Journalism Initiative program, put on the federal government. So just so you are aware, that's what's going on.
Still love you, Gareth, and I really appreciate what you do.
Fiber and rural internet. So we might have talked about this a bit, but the Fraser Canyon has fiber in the ground, and residents plus fiber plus First Nations are being quoted very high expense estimates to connect to it, even though just tens of meters away from the cable.
Yeah, that is a very, very real issue. And that's actually, I believe, addressed in the 14 recommendations my party has put forward, that we need to stop that prohibitive pricing from connecting certain Indigenous communities and rural communities close to the fiber optic cables. So that practice needs to stop. And it is a very real issue, and it's something I'm becoming more and more aware of.
We're hearing promises of expedited funding application processes, money available, relationships with on-the-ground partners. In quotes, I'm assuming this is TELUS, but rural connectivity advocates say no money is being spent on actual projects. We have heard high-speed connectivity promises in the Fraser Canyon and corridor since 2015. In 2018, the CRTC said minimum speeds by the end of 2021 should be 50 megabytes down and 10 megabytes upload. And this person's speed is 9 down, 1 up.
Okay. Yeah, again, I believe that's addressed in the recommendations of the Conservative Party. We on the transparency side, we need to uphold a certain standard and make sure that we reach that standard in all parts of Canada. And this guy is a business owner. This individual is a business owner, and they're having trouble doing their business because they don't have access to an essential service in Canada, and internet is an essential service. And I know the impact high-speed internet will positively have on Ashcroft and Cache Creek, and we need to move in that direction. And that's why I started this whole process as well. So to that individual, this is an issue I'm concerned about, and look forward to pushing more moving forward and making sure that we put forward a policy approach that reflects your needs to operate successfully.
So we're into the last two sort of sections here. So this is from one person, 3 questions from anonymous. This community needs to see you. Have you been around?
Yeah. So during the election, I mentioned and I even published it in the newspaper, a canyon schedule. I set up a remote office in conjunction with the MLA, and we were moving ahead accordingly. My last trip, well, in March, I was scheduled to come up the second week of March. That was canceled because of COVID-19 and me upholding the regulations of Dr. Bonnie Henry at the provincial level. And secondly, my trip in April or May was canceled as well. So I basically have it on my calendar to be coming up every 4 to 6 weeks. And I haven't been able to do that given the pandemic. But as soon as the restrictions are lifted further, I will be coming up. I do plan to make, we just entered phase 2 last week, I believe, of reopening the economy. So I do feel comfortable coming up now, and will be making my first trip likely next week to talk about infrastructure with some of the various public officials through the canyon.
We had originally planned to do this live together in studio because you were going to come up this week. So
yeah, no, but I wanted to make sure that I believe phase 3 is starting next week, and I just wanted to make sure that I was upholding those standards.
for sure.
And it's also with my committee responsibilities. I wouldn't have had as much time to meet with all the officials if I didn't if I came up now while still appearing on virtual committee. And because of the internet connectivity, if I was traveling between towns, I wasn't going to be able to do my job. So
you got to get that internet going up here.
Yeah.
So what are you, and you might have already answered this, but what are you doing for the rural communities here?
I think we've covered that a lot with the just being a voice in Ottawa, bringing forward initiative like the broadband internet and making sure that people have access to this essential service, and being present and making sure that all of my constituents, irrespective of where they live, have access to my office and the services that a member of Parliament provides. And I think that my initial actions demonstrated that I was up to that challenge and was moving it absolutely in the right direction. And I look forward to picking up where I left off once some of the restrictions are lifted.
So the next question is, what are you doing for your riding? But that sounds very similar to the previous question, so I'm going to change it a little bit. Hopefully the person at home doesn't mind too much. How is it different, and how is it different working in Mission and Abbotsford versus working in the Fraser Canyon?
Yeah, well, this is a big issue and a big problem. I am a people person first and foremost, and even in where you are in Ashcroft during the campaign, I was up on a pretty regular basis, knocking on doors, connecting with people one-on-one, and having that face-to-face interaction. And I haven't been able to do that, and I think you miss something when it's just over the internet. So that's how my work's been changed. I'd also note that Service Canada offices have shut across the riding, and that has increased my workload substantially from people from all corners of the riding who just need help with normal things like OAS and GIS, just applying for them, their Canada Child Benefit, passports, everything. All of that work has increased enormously since the government offices have shut down.
Where are we here? So what do you think about the pandemic? Sorry, what do you think about this pandemic as harming our health and the economy?
Well, I definitely believe that we're in a very challenging financial position right now as a country. I'm not questioning the response of the government. I believe we took a Team Canada approach, and all of Parliament is responsible for how we responded with the benefit programs to something that we haven't seen ever in the history of Canada. But right now, we need to start looking ahead and really planning what it's going to look like in Canada when we open up the economy and when things return back to normal. I believe that we need to follow the examples of countries like South Korea and Taiwan, where they were able to open their economy much faster by implementing social distancing, social distancing procedures that allowed their economy to continue to function during the pandemic. So yeah, sorry, can you repeat the question? Actually, I just kind of went on a tangent there.
What do you think about this pandemic? It's weirdly written. What do you think about this pandemic has harming our health and the economy?
Yeah, on our personal health. So we've also seen during the pandemic that most of the large majority of deaths, I believe over 3/4, have taken place in seniors' homes, and we really need a new policy to address the public health issues that we're facing there while getting our economy going. I think for a lot of people, they've struggled with their mental health during the lockdown. They're used to going to work. They're not used to being at home, and that's really hurt them. And their personal health, and it's something that I think needs to be addressed. And again, on the economy, we really need to move forward and get a plan together so we can start recovering, so more jobs and businesses aren't lost.
And last question from here. I get that people need help right now. We need to stop the massive spending spree in Ottawa. Our kids will be paying for this. What can you tell me about what needs to tackle the deficit and fix our economy?
Yeah, again, first off, we need an economic plan that is scrutinized by Parliament for the best interests of Canadians. We're going to have to look. I really am opposed to there's a lot of ideas about big tax increases coming down the road to pay for all of the spending. I'm generally not in favor of large tax increases because it's going to further stifle economic growth. I think we need to create a foundation where companies can begin to operate again under the new in this new environment, that we make that we do everything possible to ensure that they can. I think we also need to look at domesticating some of our supply chains a little more closely and seeing what we can do more in Canada to create jobs here. Going back to personal protective equipment, still a major issue in Canada. We don't have the manufacturing capacity to do everything right now in this country, and I think that COVID-19 should give us pause to look at how our economy and our sovereignty and our recovery all go together, and look at bringing some of these production capacities back into Canadian hands, not only to create jobs, but to protect our sovereignty as well. We also have to look very closely at global supply chains as it relates to our food exports and whether those are going to continue in the same manner as well. But broadly speaking, we need policies from the government that are going to incentivize people to get back to work, that is going to give companies that are taking risks a leg up, and we need to look strategically where the government plays a role in that process.
So that's
first and foremost an economic plan, though.
Fair enough. So that's it for the questions that we sort of came up with before we did this. I have two more questions that sort of pop into my head, if you don't mind.
Yeah, please.
I think I have you for 6 more minutes.
Okay.
So a lot of talk that I've been seeing right now about restarting the economy is revolving around a 4-day work week. Do you think there's any benefit to that, or is that something that you've heard?
I haven't heard too much about it. I would be reluctant to accept a 4-day work week. I think what we need are provisions in place to ensure that if people are feeling sick, that they're not going to work if they're at risk of spreading COVID-19. But generally, I think we need to just get. I don't see how a 4-day work week would help us improve our economic productivity.
Would 10 days of paid sick leave? Did you feel like that might fix the problem?
Well, I think it's something the provincial government should absolutely be addressing, but I think it was wrong for the federal NDP to put that at the federal level, because we all know that our labor code is regulated by the provincial government. So they use that as a bargaining chip to support the Liberals to shut down Parliament until September. I don't believe it's ever going to come to fruition, because each province is going to have their own idea about what to do. Can you imagine the federal government telling Quebec that they need to implement a provincial 10-day sick leave program? I'm sorry, it's not going to happen. And it was wrong of the NDP to put that as their condition for supporting the government.
And last question for me. The conservative leadership is up for grabs at the moment. There's
Yes.
people vying for that. Are you comfortable saying who you're going to put your banner behind?
Yeah, if you're following my Twitter, you're probably already seeing it a bit already. But I believe Aaron O'Toole is the best person to lead the Conservative Party forward. He brings military, business, and a good parliamentary record to the table. I also believe he's taken a strong position on the Chinese Communist Party right now, and some of the negative things that they're doing internationally that are having a big impact on us here in British Columbia. And so I'll just on the leadership, I'll just pivot to one other point. I was actually last night I signed a document challenging the Chinese Communist Party on their treatment of Hong Kong. I believe that we're facing a major human rights issue there, and the rights of the Hong Kong people under the Sino-British Declaration of 1997 have been completely destroyed by the Chinese party. And I think in Canada, we need to take a very close look about our relationship with the communists in China and their government moving forward. And Aaron O'Toole's got a great position on that. I also think he's got a great position on helping youth entering the labor market after university or trade school.
Awesome. Well, that's all I got for tonight.
Yeah, was there any questions from the audience? Anyone listening in that want to ask me anything?
Well, there was some quest. I'm just going to see if there's any comments here. Brad, the pictures of Nicholas and Declan. So Barbara,
Yes.
Barbara Roden says, Brad, the pictures of Declan and Nicholas were lovely.
Oh, thank you. Those are my two boys, and I don't post a lot of personal things on Facebook, but to be honest, I was kind of having a bit of a rough day with work the other day, and I thought, what a better way to pick me up than to post some nice pictures of my kids, and it sure helped, and a lot of people who know me in the riding were pleased to see that, because a lot of people asked me about especially my 6-month-old at home. So thank you, Mayor Roden.
Lisa Defoe says, we need better internet options for sure. Vicky Trill says, thank you for advocating for broadband. Vicky Trill says, we sure don't miss the boil water advisory. So Ashcroft just got a new water treatment plant.
Yeah.
So
good.
So thank you to that. And that's really all the comments that we have.
Okay.
So that's pretty much it. But we would like you to, so we're going to shut down this live video now, but we would like you to stay on with us for another minute once we have it shut down. So thank you everyone for watching. Thank you, Mr. Vis, for taking the time to do this video with us. And we will see you all next time on the Hub Online Network.
Hey, thank you, Gareth. Once again, really appreciated the questions. I think that it covered a lot of different areas, and it was very helpful for everyone involved.
Awesome. All right.